The Professional Standards Committee of Sussex Police Authority met at midday on the 13th of October 2010. On your screen is part of a web page with the agenda for the meeting. Top right is a claim that the Professional Standards Committee is a public meeting. The announcement under the heading on the left shows that this is only partly true. The meeting will be held at 12:00. The meeting will be closed to the public until 1:00. The webcast started shortly after 1 p.m, so any member of the public who attended the meeting and anyone who watched the webcast was excluded from the secret part of the meeting. The first substantial item on the agenda was item 6, Complaints by Division/District, Lewes. Oral report by Chief Constable. The agenda item proved misleading, as it was Natalie who reported to the committee. Those present had handouts which were not available on the website, and those present could apparently see projected slides which were not visible in the webcast. The chairman introduces the speaker.
Fine, thank you. Over to you, Natalie.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Natalie. I'm the District Commander for Lewes District, and the reason I've come today really is, as Gordon suggested, I'm going to give you an overview of what complaints means to me at a district level. The copy of the handout is actually the presentation that I'm going to run through, but briefly I'm just going to look at how complaints come in, who makes them, what they're about, why they're made in the first place, the process that we put in place at a district level, and what issues that raises for me as a district commander. So that gives you a very brief overview of what we're going to look at. So from a district perspective, although we refer to complaint, and I think everybody understands the word complaint, what I look at is that definition underneath that I've written, which is actually about addressing victim and community dissatisfaction. And for me, increasing confidence whilst considering the actions of my staff is sort of an encompassing statement around issues that come to me around dissatisfaction, and I'd rather call it dissatisfaction rather than complaints.
So, if you are in the Lewes district and wish to make a complaint about the police, you should perhaps instead ask the police to address victim and community dissatisfaction. How do complaints come in?
How do they come in? Through a real plethora of different ways.
Through what?
Through a real plethora of different ways.
What happens then?
When a complaint or a dissatisfaction issue comes in, what does that actually mean in real terms? Well, actually, what it means is whatever the information I've got in front of me, I need to work out what it's about. So I need to actually get some research done. And the reality of that is, if it's an incident that involves one of my response officers, I'll send it to the response inspector, who will send it to the response sergeant, who will send it to the officer that was involved, to give some form of explanation as to what has gone on, to pass it back to the sergeant for comment, to pass it back to the inspector for comment, to route it back to me for me to establish whether I need to what I'm actually going to respond to this person that's made the inquiry in the first place.
And what is the outcome of those activities?
None of the complaints against any of my officers over the last year have been substantiated.
Natalie does not neglect the chairman's pet topic.
The issue that I could really do with some help is where we've got complainers who clearly fit into the category of having mental health issues. How can we deal with that? Because the processes that we currently have in place don't allow me to say we're not going to look at this and we're not going to investigate it. There's certainly one individual who the statistics unfortunately are skewed as a result of it. I think the Chief Constable's office is now up to its 40th letter, and I spent half an hour on the phone with him this morning.
My video about the last meeting of this committee featured the Chief Constable's comment on the chairman's expressions of anger about professional complainants on the 30th of July 2009.
There is a standard form of letter which says, in response to the third persistent complaint, I will not be responding to any further. Yours sincerely.
Why, more than a year later, are Sussex Police proving so incompetent? Let's move on to agenda item 8, complaints against the police. For this, a report had been published by the Chief Constable and the Chief Executive. According to the report's subliterate conclusion, the style and content of this report reflects a change in approval towards improved comparative data to allow for members to make informal judgments. The report offers no narrative to explain salient points, although the head of Professional Standards Department will be presenting to the committee at the meeting.
Complaints against the police, Steve.
Thank you. You should hopefully have the report and the associated bundle of papers, which are divided into a number of sections covering the force of the whole, and then each division and a bundle of requirements at the end.
It looks at first like the usual numbers game. The superintendent turns over and comments on what look like 36 sheets of statistics and graphs. Sometimes figures had gone up, which might be good or needing attention, as the case might be, and sometimes they had gone down, which again could be good or in need of looking at. At the end of this, however, there was an encouraging sign. The previous chairman of this committee began to ask questions, which suggests that there is now at least one member of the authority who is becoming more than a mere prop to Sussex Police.
There are two areas which give me cause for concern where there's been some kind of increase. One is malpractice, and there are failures in duty which generally seem to be increasing. And I wonder whether you might wish to comment upon that. And going back to the first sheet on the Sussex Police overall, you mentioned that the complaint allegations had increased, I think you said, but the number of officers had reduced against whom the complaints are made. Does that therefore mean that there are a certain number of officers who are getting more complaints?
It could be, but probably more likely that each individual complaint that we're getting has a number of different facets, and there's more facets to it. So, for instance, if I was to complain and I said, right, I'm unhappy with 2 things, that would count as 2 allegations. Whereas I could say I'm unhappy with 6, and of course that's 6 allegations. So it probably more realistically is that the complaints we're getting have got more facets to it than we have to record. That's my sort of interpretation of what I'm seeing here. So whereas the numbers of complaints against officers is reducing, the number of allegations actually is going up, but against fewer officers. That's as I've interpreted it.
On the Brighton and Hove analysis, I'm looking at allegations by district and type. And it just struck me that to ask a question really as to whether there or not is an issue in Central District, because oppressive behaviour, failures in duty and malpractice are significantly higher in that district than any of the other, either of the two. Is there any reason for that?
Without having done the sort of full analysis, I can't give you a definitive.
I think so. This is fine, and you know it's the kind of response one, without being rude, you might expect. But I would personally like some kind of investigation as to why Central District is so much higher than the other two. Okay, part of it will be explained by the increased numbers and the kind of culture that exists in Central Brighton. I realise that, but the failures in duty is significant, I think.
The last comment on this agenda item included an unforeseen revelation by Councillor Duncan about the secret part of this meeting.
The presentation that we heard this morning about not the formal kind of public complaints, but the, if you like, the misconduct side of things and the internal process.
That partly explains why documents provided for the Professional Standards Committee's public meetings only ever contain reports of trivial complaints. The chairman's summing up refers again to the misconduct side of things.
I think this morning, as you pointed out, we discovered things about misconduct and the way that's dealt with, which we in the past have not had any oversight of.
But the chairman adds a second revelation.
I was surprised to find that people like complaints against PCSOs were actually dealt with by a totally different process, and we don't see that.
Police authorities are required by law to examine complaints registers. Those registers should be complete.